The biggest downfall for the McBee family in the McBee dynasty. Real American Cowboys has always been Steve McBee Sr., and it appears that this has not changed, even with Steve off-screen. However, after watching Galina fall apart, it seems that Steve's son, Stephen McBee Jr., is starting to see the ugly truth about his father. Stephen is finally beginning to confront the way the McBee men treat women in the McBee dynasty. The McBee Dynasty Season 2 on Bravo follows the McBee brothers as they strive to keep the family business afloat while navigating their issues. Throughout the season, Stephen has been struggling with his relationships with his father, his ex-girlfriend, and business partner Galina. As Stephen works to help Galina move on from his father, it seems like Stephen is finally realizing just how much of a mess Steve Sr. left behind, and how he needs to change as well. Galina is breaking down on the McBee family dynasty. Although not part of the McBee family, Galina has become the most essential member of the company. However, in recent episodes, her performance has been less than stellar because of Steve's affair with Masha, Galina's friend. When Galina's personal life ruins a big deal, Stephen is fed up and considers cutting ties with her. Galina has been consistently escalating in concerning behavior. Galina wrecked Masha's car, broke into Steve Sr.'s lodge, and even hurt Masha's chickens. However, it is not until Stephen catches Galina drunk at work that he decides he would rather try to fix the situation. Stephen is initially angry at Galina, but when she breaks down and tells him exactly how hurt she is, Stephen cannot help but try to support her. He even tells Galina that as much as he loves his dad as a father, Stephen knows that Steve Sr. is a terrible husband and boyfriend. Instead of just breaking ties with Galina, as Steve did, Stephen works with his brothers to help Galina move past her issues. Unfortunately, the issues Steve Sr. has caused run much deeper than the McBee brothers realize. Stephen meets with another one of Steve Sr.'s ex-girlfriends. Trying to gain clarity about Steve Sr. and his poor treatment of Galina, Stephen goes to another one of his ex-girlfriends, Brooke, for advice. Brooke pointed out some significant issues in how Steve Sr. had treated her, and explained that she had been caught in a toxic web with him and Galina. Stephen tells her that now Galina is also stuck in the web with Masha. During this conversation, Brooke details how freeing and amazing it feels to be with a man who treats her well. Since leaving Steve Sr., Brooke has gotten engaged and is happier than ever. Meeting with Brooke forces Stephen to look at the cycle of toxic behavior that Steve Sr. has maintained by dating and cheating on all these women, including his mother, Christy McBee. Ultimately, Stephen explains that he respects Brooke for leaving Steve Sr. instead of sticking by his side, unlike Masha. Stephen deals with his romantic relationship. The conversation with Brooke not only gives Stephen new insight into his father, but also forces him to confront some of his own poor choices regarding his ex-girlfriend, Kala Jackson. Time after time, Stephen has lied to Kala, which ultimately led to the failure of their relationship. He even talked badly about Kala behind her back. Yet after talking to Brooke, he has begun to take accountability. For the first time, Stephen acknowledges how McBee men treat women. Hopefully, this is the first step to breaking a cycle that Stephen has only just realized affects him as well. Steve Sr. has made a mess of the McBee family in many ways, but Stephen seems to be finally recognizing that. Stephen Jr. is finally beginning to take accountability for his relationship with Kala, while understanding how his father has harmed the women in his life. By helping Galina cope with feelings of betrayal at the hands of Masha and Steve Sr., Stephen is beginning to step out of his father's shadow by admitting his mistakes, something Steve Sr. would never do. Galina's spiraling behavior had become impossible to ignore. A crucial land deal had collapsed, scuttled not by market forces, but by Galina's increasingly erratic actions. Stephen had initially bristled with frustration. He was a man of action, of logic, and Galina's emotional chaos was an unwelcome wrench in the well-oiled machinery of McBee Ranch. He'd seen the signs. The wrecked car belonging to Masha, Galina's former friend and now Steve Sr.'s latest conquest, the bizarre break-in at his father's lodge, even the inexplicable harm that had come to Masha's chickens. But it wasn't until he found her, reeking of cheap whiskey, stumbling through the ranch office in the middle of a workday, that something inside him shifted. His anger, hot and immediate, began to cool, replaced by a chilling realization. "Galina, what in God's name?" he started, his voice a low growl. She flinched, her eyes, usually sharp and calculating, now glazed with a desperate pain. He just left me, Stephen," she choked out, the words dissolving into a ragged sob that tore through her. "After everything, after Masha, he just moved on." The raw, unadulterated hurt in her voice was a physical blow. It wasn't just about a business deal anymore. It was about a woman broken and adrift, caught in the wake of his father's careless disregard. Stephen, who had always admired his father's ruthlessness in business, suddenly saw it applied to human hearts, and the sight was ugly. He loved his dad fiercely as a son. But in that moment, watching Galina dissolve, he admitted a truth he'd long suppressed. "He's a terrible husband, Galina, a terrible boyfriend. I know it." It was a quiet admission, but it felt like a seismic shift. Unlike his father, who would have cut ties, dismissed the problem, and moved on to the next conquest, Stephen felt an unfamiliar pull to fix, to mend. He couldn't abandon her. He couldn't be his father. He gathered his brothers, explaining the depth of Galina's despair, and together, they began to piece together a plan, not to discard her, but to help her navigate the treacherous emotional landscape Steve Sr. had left behind. Yet, even as they tried to build a bridge for Galina, Stephen sensed the true magnitude of the damage was far greater than they could yet comprehend. Seeking answers, a deeper understanding of this destructive pattern, Stephen found himself driving down a familiar country road, heading towards a past he hadn't thought to revisit. He was going to see Brooke, another woman who had once been entangled with Steve Sr. The air in Brooke's cozy kitchen was warm, filled with the scent of freshly brewed coffee, a stark contrast to the emotional chill of the ranch. Brooke, poised and serene, listened patiently as Stephen recounted Galina's ordeal. "It's the same old story, Stephen," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "Your father creates a web. He draws women in, makes them feel indispensable, then he moves on, leaving them tangled and broken. I was in that web. Galina's in it now with Masha." Her words resonated with a painful clarity. Brooke spoke of the manipulation, the emotional whiplash, the constant feeling of being less than. But then her face softened, a genuine smile gracing her lips. "Leaving him was the hardest thing I ever did, but it was also the most freeing. I'm engaged now, Stephen, to a man who treats me with respect, with kindness. It's amazing." The contrast was stark. Brooke, thriving, Galina, drowning, and in the middle, his father, leaving a trail of emotional wreckage. Stephen thought of his own mother, Christy McBee, who had endured years of Steve Sr.'s infidelity. The cycle wasn't new. It was a dynasty of dysfunction. He looked at Brooke, truly seeing her strength, and said, "I respect you for leaving, for not sticking around like Masha." It was a quiet acknowledgement of the courage it took to break free from the McBee gravitational pull. The conversation with Brooke was a mirror, reflecting not just his father's flaws, but his own. He thought of Calla Jackson, his ex-girlfriend. The lies, the casual dismissals, the backhanded comments he'd made behind her back. He had always rationalized it, blamed circumstances, blamed Calla herself. But now, the truth was undeniable. He, Stephen McBee Jr., had perpetuated the very same toxic patterns he was now condemning in his father. He had treated Calla with a similar lack of respect, a similar disregard for her feelings. A heavy weight settled in his chest, the weight of accountability. For the first time, Stephen acknowledged it, not just as a vague notion, but as a deeply ingrained family trait. McBee men, we treat women badly. It was a bitter pill, but one he knew he had to swallow. This realization, raw and uncomfortable, was the first step. The very first tremor of a new foundation. Steve Sr. had indeed left a sprawling emotional mess in his wake, a legacy of broken trust and fractured relationships. But in the midst of it all, Stephen Jr. was finally beginning to see. By extending a hand to Galina, by genuinely listening to Brooke, and most importantly, by confronting his own past actions with Galina, Stephen was slowly, painstakingly, stepping out of his father's long, destructive shadow. He was admitting his mistakes, something Steve Sr. would never do. And in that admission, there was a fragile hope that the McBee dynasty, for all its rugged ambition, might finally find a different, more humane path forward. This conversation forces Stephen to confront his own similar toxic behaviors in his past relationship with Galina, leading him to accept accountability and recognize a destructive pattern within the McBee men. The text concludes with Stephen's hopeful first steps towards breaking this cycle and stepping out of his father's shadow.